I'm a social scientist, psychology, recent graduate of the University of Bath. I just finished my PhD in social psychology. My main focus has been on consumer attitudes towards cultured meat. I'm also interested in other alternative proteins and meat replacement in general. Yeah, well, there's a couple of really interesting kind of psychological phenomena going on here. One is really just the range of responses that we see to cultured meat from different types of people. You know, like all new concept, there's some people who are kind of hesitant to adopt it. But there is a real range of responses, as I say, and there are many people who are very excited to buy cultured meat as well. So this can be kind of segmented using a diffusion of innovations kind of model, which identifies different groups of consumers in terms of how likely they are to adopt new innovations and want to be the first people to try new things. So, you know, while you have some consumers who are kind of at the far end of that, the laggards, you have also very early adopters and innovators who are very excited to try these products and who maybe will pay more to try them. Another interesting component of the psychology here is just how cultured meat is going to interact with our existing meat eating habits. At the moment, there's a very interesting situation in our psychology of meat consumption where there's very strong motivation for meat eaters to justify factory farming and all sorts of other things which people might have a moral problem with, but for the fact that they want to keep on eating meat. And so the psychology and the reasoning kind of follows on from the behavior, which is an interesting phenomenon that happens in kind of cognitive dissonance and motivated reasoning. And the key part about cultured meat here is that once this is widespread and adopted by everybody, the motivation to justify the animal abuse that goes on in the conventional meat industry will just evaporate. So you have this kind of motivated reasoning situation where the motivation is just about to disappear. So that's kind of another interesting component of the psychology here. Yeah, well, you may be aware that there have been kind of several names used and suggested for cultured meat over the years. Well, I use cultured meat. Some people now say cultivated meat. In the past, the industry has adopted the term clean meat, although it's moved away from this somewhat. Names help to form immediate associations, especially with respect to concepts that we're not familiar with. We know that most people haven't heard of cultured meat at all, so when they hear about it, they're hearing about it for the first time. And that component of the name will really color their subsequent perceptions of it by forming those immediate associations. So, for example, names like lab-grown meat, which you sometimes see used in the media, highlights this kind of feeling that this is something unnatural and something that people might be wary of, whereas other names like clean meat have been used to draw attention to the benefits of cultured meat to the environment and its, you know, cleanliness, freedom from pathogens and antibiotics and so on. So it's really about forming those associations which then lead on to our evaluations of the concept. Yes, good question. Well, sharing information about the benefits of cultured meat helps. Not only are we able to avoid the slaughter of animals by using cultured meat, but we can also address many of the public health concerns that go along with conventional meat production, and at just a fraction of the environmental cost in terms of greenhouse gases and also inputs like land and water. So sharing all of that information helps people to understand that there are good reasons to do this. But in fact, sharing information about the really the superiority of cultured meat in many ways, leaning into the potential health and purity kind of benefits of cultured meat is a good way of directly addressing some of the most common consumer concerns. Well, as I say, most people, most consumers are keen to try cultured meat. We see around 2/3 saying that they would try cultured meat in many countries. But the main concerns tend to relate to product safety. They're often concerned to the perception of cultured meat as unnatural. People often have this intuition that unnatural is unsafe or unhealthy, whereas of course that's not necessarily the case. Yeah, I would think that, you know, this is well addressed by explaining to consumers that conventional meat mostly is very far from natural as well. You know, we're talking about breeds of animals which are deliberately much bigger than they would be in nature. They're reared in very artificial settings indoors. They're often applied with hormones and antibiotics. So, you know, the kind of idealistic natural meat production which many people think of, you know, kind of assume that we have today, is probably quite far from the truth. And something like cultured meat, you know, while people may see it as unnatural, can actually address many of those issues. Yeah, some consumers perceive cultured meat kind of firstly as similar to genetic modification, you know, particularly when it's something that maybe you don't know much about. It's just kind of in the category of science in food, I suppose. In fact, it's very different technologies. Whether people, you know or understand that, I guess, is a different matter. There are cultured meat production techniques which can use genetically modified inputs or ingredients. And there are cultured meat production techniques which avoid genetic modification in all stages. So there is kind of some potential benefits of genetic modification to some parts of the production process, but it's not a necessary component. And yes, you're quite right that basically the same types of people who tend to be kind of anti-GM are also the people who are kind of intuitively, you know, anti-cultured meat. And they tend to be people with kind of naturalness heuristic and an assumption that, you know, violations of natural things are necessarily bad. Well, the most obvious benefits are to animals. People mostly understand, you know, this is a way of avoiding killing the animals. And many people also understand that this could be much better for the environment. There's increasing awareness of the damaging impacts of conventional meat on the environment. So many people, you know, realize that that could be a benefit as well. So those are the kind of things which consumers automatically think of, benefits to animals and to the environment. But there's some data to suggest that actually the most important things to stress are potential benefits actually to the consumer, or perceived benefits to the consumer, in terms of having a clean product that can be free from pathogens and antibiotics, which are often found in conventional meat, and really a way of you know, nipping those concerns in the bud and actually framing those areas as you know, benefits on the side of cultured meat. Yeah, so some early data suggested that American consumers could be more open to cultured meat than consumers in the UK. But actually, more recent data suggested that may not be the case, and perhaps we see actually quite high levels of acceptance in both the US and the UK. There are some countries within Europe that are going to be more open to adopting cultured meat than others. For example, we just had a study recently showing much higher levels of acceptance in Germany compared to France. So, you know, where there are cultural differences, and particularly when they relate to countries where consumption and indeed production of meat is a very central part of their culture or their economy. So there are some such differences along those lines. And Asia as well is likely to be an especially promising market. Previous research has indicated that acceptance in India and in China is higher than in the US. And many Asian governments seem to have quite a positive disposition towards cultured meat as well. You might have heard that cultured meat has just been approved as of today for sale in Singapore. Yeah, so that's the first government approval of cultured meat coming in Singapore. And there's also been some indications that the government of China are quite sympathetic towards the concept.